Welcome everyone to Transit Talks webinar on leveraging state and federal funding for transit. I'm Jacqueline Cuddy with CalACT, and forgive my voice, I've got a bit of a cold, but we're providing this webinar in partnership with the California Transit Association and our speakers from CalSTART. I really want to thank the CalSTART team for providing this important information to both of our members on funding for buses and infrastructure to assist with the implementation of the innovative Clean Transit Rule. Next, I'd like to introduce Michael Pimentel to say a few words before we introduce our speakers and review some ground rules. Michael?
Yeah, thank you, Jackie, for that introduction. And folks, good to be with you again this afternoon. I just want to start off by observing that over the last decade, the California Transit Association, in partnership with the California Association for Coordinated Transportation, have worked together here at the state level to establish multi-year funding for the HVIP program and to see those funding levels increase. At the same time, we've worked to make the HVIP program easier to subscribe to for our transit agency members, as well as for our bus OEM members who are so critical in delivering zero-emission projects. Now today, we're going to hear from the CalSTART team on some of those ongoing improvements that have been made to the HVIP program to make your drawdown of resources that much easier. And at the same time, we will be having a discussion on the advent of new and significantly higher funding levels provided by the bipartisan infrastructure law, primarily through the Lono grant and bus facilities program. As an association, we had worked to see an increase in that funding to increase those levels by 500% over the life of that body of law. And we're excited for the conversation that we're able to have today, again, with our partners at CalSTART. And so at this time, please hand things back to Jackie to take us through introductions and then on to our program.
Thank you, Michael. And before I start with the introductions, I want to go over some quick ground rules before we introduce our speakers. This webinar is not for the press and cannot be duplicated or published without the permission of both associations and CalSTART. All attendees are muted, but we encourage you to type questions into the question box on your screen there. You'll see it at the bottom of the screen next to the chat. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. The presentations will be available after the webinar on the California Transit Association and CalACT websites within 2 days. And with that, I want to thank our panelists again for joining us today and introduce our speakers. First, we have Katrina Bayer. She's the lead project manager for the California Bus Transit. Katrina joined CalSTART in 2023, where she focuses on implementing zero-emission transit fleets by assisting agencies with planning, procurement, and deployment of zero-emission buses. Before moving to California in 2023, Katrina spent 13 years working in mobility and clean transportation in the Houston area. There, Katrina served as Deputy Assistant Director of the Traffic Management Branch of Houston Public Works, held planning, advocacy, and leadership roles at the Central Houston, Inc., and launched the Transit Fleet Expansion Program at the Houston-Galveston Area Council. Katrina holds a Bachelor of Arts in Economics with a focus on public policy from Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. She is a certified planner and project manager professional. She enjoys being outdoors and spending time in nature and seeks to expand mobility and sustainability. Next, we have Hannah Hamilton. She is a lead project manager for CalSTART. She joined CalSTART in 2019, and her primary role at CalSTART is supporting the California HVIP program, including the HVIP dealer training and vehicle eligibility updates. Other projects span from user acceptance analysis of new transit vehicle technologies to aiding transit agencies with the information they need to comply with CARB's innovative clean transit regulation. She graduated from Northern Michigan University in 2018 and holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and holds a certified associate in project management from the Project Management Institute. Thanks again, guys, for speaking, and I'll turn it over to Hannah.
Thank you, Jackie. I love the full bios being read. That was amazing. Thank you. All right, allow me to share my screen here. We'll go ahead and hop right on into it. All right, thanks everyone for taking the time today to join us. got some information that we want to get out to you regarding HVIP and its use for you as you go into head into the low-no season. So quick agenda, I'll touch on HVIP at first, and then Katrina will step in and talk in detail about FTA low-no. And with that, I'll share with you about HVIP. So to start, HVIP is the Hybrid and Zero Emission Truck and Bus Voucher Incentive Program. It started back in 2009. Funds became available to the public in 2010 and has been around for the majority of those years up until today. I know we had some issues back in 2020, 2021 with some funding shortfalls. But since 2022, we've had funds that have been available nonstop through HVIP. So just a few stats here, over 50%, 60% of HVIP funds go to vehicles that are driven in pollution burdened communities, well over 1,700 fleets that are participating. This is a program that is it's a CARB program administered by CalSTART for all, 13, 14 years of HVIP's existence. Jumping in here, if you are looking for a vehicle, as a purchaser, the first stop is to check out the vehicle catalog at californiahvip.org. The design of the catalog is to filter through the type of vehicle that you're actually interested in. For the topic of this presentation, that's going to be the heavy duty or medium duty buses. And from there, we do have the contact information of each seller of each vehicle listed on the vehicle profile to make it easier for you to do direct communication with the seller of that vehicle directly from the web page. As a purchaser, this is a simplified version, a visual of how participating in HVIP works. If you haven't heard of HVIP before, it is not a rebate program. It's a program where we provide funding for the incremental cost of a vehicle so that it is at a more comparable price to its internal combustion engine counterparts. We work with the dealers, the sellers of those vehicles. Those sellers of the vehicles go through training in HVIP in order to become approved dealers. That does include manufacturers. We kind of lump dealers and manufacturers under the same term, HVIP approved dealer. When you select the vehicle that you're interested in, like I mentioned on the last slide, there's contact information on that vehicle. You'll reach out to that dealer, work with them on a vehicle price, details. For the transit set aside, which we'll get into here in the next couple of slides, a purchase order isn't required at the time of submitting a voucher request. Your dealer is the one submitting the request for you. A letter of intent can be submitted in order to submit a voucher request for HVIP. Later on, you will sign that purchase order. The dealer signing a purchase order and submitting that to progress the voucher along. The HVIP incentive amount does need to be reflected on the purchase order that gets submitted. So on the letter of intent, you're submitting anticipated incentive amounts, and then on that signed purchase order, we need to see that incentive amount on the contract, so that skip ahead terms and conditions are signed. You get the vehicle at the end of the vouchers, the process of building out the vehicle, having it delivered. There's no rebate, like I'd mentioned, because you had just paid for a vehicle minus the HVIP incentive amount. We cut the check to the dealer, and we go on our merry way. So as of yesterday, this is the current status of the different funding umbrellas, set asides of HVIP standard. HVIP is the largest umbrella, and where if you're not eligible for any of the other set-asides, you're automatically funneled into standard HVIP. It's, if you've participated in the past, this is the traditional version of what HVIP had looked like before. We had all these different set-asides. And then today, as you're probably most interested in, the public transit set-aside or transit set-aside is $84 million currently available. All right, so I'll slow it down a little bit to talk about funding through HVIP. HVIP funds are based off of the vehicle weight, or GVWR, and the base incentive amount is just HVIP amount based on GVWR. Then we get into modifiers and base incentive adjustments. For transit voucher requests, there's the possibility of having the base amount doubled if your fleet has 20 or less medium and heavy duty vehicles within that fleet. And then we have modifiers, which is just the base incentive amount, that 45, 60, 85, 120, adding that 15%, which is automatically applied to transit vouchers. If you're that small fleet, 20 or less, you're going to get that doubled. And then that doubled amount receives the 15% modifier. Same applies to disadvantaged communities, as well as fuel cell. Fuel cell is the doubled amount modifier as well. And I'm gonna guess there's probably gonna be some questions on that, but we'll keep going here. Some updates on HVIP. First is that, as I mentioned earlier, HVIP is still open, has been open, continues to be open. If in any case the transit set aside runs out of funds and there's still funding available through standard HVIP, we will continue to fund transit set aside voucher requests through the standard HVIP funding bucket. Purchase orders for new voucher requests are going to, this date has changed as of January 1st of this year. So purchase orders can be dated no later than March 30th of last year. The letters of intent, which we'll get into here on the next slide. If you were following these transit flexibilities last year, was January 1st of last year. Again, on January 1st of this year, it rolled over into January 1st of 2024 is the oldest a letter of intent can be submitted this year for HVIP's transit voucher requests. Let me see here. Voucher amounts are modified according to the number of vehicles in a fleet starting January 1st. This is kind of going back to, this is a general HVIP update from last year that applies this year. There's no reductions. You may see on our website that there's reductions on the incentive amount if your fleet is a certain size. We don't apply those reductions to transit vouchers. So the only fleet voucher adjustment that you're going to see is that doubling of the voucher amount if you're 20 vehicles or less in your fleet. So no losing there. And then that last bullet point there is, or I guess it's not the last one, it's the third one down, is that we have increased the voucher cap from 30 vouchers per calendar year for purchasers to 50 vouchers per calendar year for purchasers. Okay, here's the goodies. Excuse me. So at the end of October of last year, we rolled out and published these transit flexibilities through HVIP, through the transit set aside, which include a 36-month redemption timeline. So this is a doubling of how long we're allowing for transit vouchers to take in order to redeem, compared to any other voucher in the system. Any other voucher in the system has 18 months to redeem, without either expiring or requiring some sort of extension and review process with CARB. 36 months, just understanding that it can take longer for the procurement process, for the build process, receiving the vehicles, etc. That's just one less thing to have to worry about is an expiring voucher. Okay, and then I've been mentioning letters of intent. This is going to be important for our next slide. But the letter of intent, as I'd mentioned on the last slide, is that the date can be no older on the purchase or on the letter of intent than 1/1/24. If you're going to submit a voucher request with a letter of intent, if you're going to have your dealer submit a voucher request with a letter of intent, it needs to be followed up with an actual contract, a purchase order within 6 months of submission. And we do have a template. We have resources for all of these things that I'm spitting out to you today on our website, including a template for the letter of intent. And that last item there, we continue to have that 15% modifier, as I mentioned earlier, that applies to any transit bus voucher request. So here's where we're really excited to be in this FTA Lono season and to be able to, if you haven't heard this before, introduce to you now or remind you that HVIP can be used as a local match funding source for any for your Lono applications. So how this works, HVIP has not been eligible. It's been incompatible with Lono applications in the past because a contract has been required in order to secure HVIP funds. This is no longer the case because we are encouraging you to use that letter of intent in order to submit a voucher request. What happens is the LOI is submitted. Your dealer is submitting the LOI. Once the request progresses we do our initial reviews of what's been submitted using that LOI. It gets to a status, what we call funds reserved, where the purchaser and the dealer both receive confirmations from, it's automatically generated from our system saying funds have been reserved for you for X number of vehicles for this X amount of dollars. And that letter, that email that we send to you that's from our system is what can be used as confirmation that funds have been set aside for those vehicles for you as a customer to go after those Lono, go after the Lono grant. We've run this past the FTA, got their sign off. This is all good to go. So if you receive an email using an LOI, and you receive that email saying funds are reserved through HVIP, it means funds have been set aside. Nobody else can touch it out of this bucket of HVIP dollars. It's set aside for you. It's our assurance and guarantee, not necessarily guarantee. It's their assurance that nobody else can touch these dollars so long as you continue along the process of redeeming your voucher. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, within 6 months, a voucher does require that signed purchase order. The last note here is that CARB does offer support letters for FTA Lono and bus facility applications. If you're interested, do reach out. They're happy to offer that for you. Quickly here, I believe we have some dealers, some folks who participate in HVIP as an approved dealer who may or may not be aware of these earlier redemption options for transit vouchers. What it means is that we can move the voucher along and get it redeemed sooner without final payment, without that title transfer date or vehicle registration submitted into the VPC. We have a delivery document that's available on the website for you to use in order to get the ball rolling on an earlier redemption. And then within 30 days of redemption, us cutting the check and sending it over to you, those missing items, the title transfer date, DMV registration, and final invoice will need to be uploaded into the VPC. HVIP vouchers associated with contracts in which there's retainage are ineligible for early redemption. Otherwise, we're good to go to use a delivery document. There is a template for that delivery document on our website, just like there's a template for the LOI. And here's where you'll find that information. Excuse me. If you go to californiahvip.org and select the purchaser button at the top, and then from the select funding type drop down, do the public transit. You'll get templates, details of the set aside through what is called the Appendix H. This in that appendix is, of course, the appendix to the implementation manual for HVIP. This is all available, or if you type in www.californiahvip.org/transit bus. Some other useful tools that are available either through the HVIP website or linked to our website is the Funding Finder tool. So there has been an update to our Funding Finder tool. I don't know if there's been an update to our Funding Finder tool, which includes a near doubling to the number of funding sources listed on the tool. It's just got an overall improved user experience. Katrina will put links to this in the chat. There's also our voucher map and data if you're interested in seeing where the funds go. That is available in the impact part tab on our website, californiahvip.org. And then lastly, and there, Katrina will put a link to the voucher map in the chat as well. Lastly, there's just resources. If you go to our website, californiahvip.org/purchasers. And more resources at our website or by emailing us at info@californiahvip.org. Okay, lastly, the partial sales and use tax exemption for zero emission buses has been extended. So this means this was due to expire on December 31st of 2023, but has been extended to December 31st of 2025. Vehicle eligibility is based on whether the vehicles are eligible for HVIP. However, you are not required to use HVIP funds in order to receive, or in order to be eligible. You don't have to use HVIP to be eligible for the partial tax exemption. I will throw some links to the details of this in the chat because I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Katrina. Let me see here.
Thank you, Hannah, for going over HVIP with us. So Hannah's told us all about HVIP and the funding available, as well as the additional flexibilities. And I just want to make sure we all give Hannah a lot of credit here because she worked really hard to work with CARB to figure out how to make the funding more accessible to transits. We knew there were difficulties in the past, and we want y'all to be able to utilize this funding, and we want you to be able to redeem these vouchers. And especially now during this loaner season, which is really what my presentation is going to focus on. As I'm sure you all know, the the 5339 program includes both low or no emission grant funding for the purchase or lease of low or no emission buses and supporting infrastructure. It also includes bus and bus facilities funding, which are funds for the replacement and rehabilitation of buses and facility related equipment. The NOFO covers both of the programs and is consolidated. The review process, as it is for most competitive programs, is relatively simple. It starts with intake from the FTA, which is primarily applicant and project eligibility screening. Review teams comprised of volunteers from the different regional offices, as well as from DC and headquarters, review and rate each application for each of the evaluation criteria in the NOFO. So it's always key to keep in mind, they're going to lay out for you what they're looking for. They want you to succeed. The point is to give us the tools to succeed. So careful reading of the NOFO is a must. Then the review and evaluation committee can take into account additional considerations, whether they be racial equity, justice 40, or climate change. And finally, they do review and selection and announcement, which occurs within 75 days of the close of the application period. Evaluation criteria vary from year to year, as one would expect, but will pretty much always include such things as a demonstration of need and benefits. They want to see that we've done planning and local regional prioritization. So, show that you've been in contact with your MPO, your transportation management agency, your local council of governments. They want to see documentation of that. They also want to see local financial commitment. As we know, local match on federal projects is traditionally 20%. For low and no emission projects, it's a lower amount. It's 15% required as local share for vehicle purchases, and 10% for lease and facilities. Let's see, project implementation strategy is also important. Again, they're going to receive hundreds of applications, and you want to show that, whether you have a history of implementing projects using federal funds or not, that you've thought through what it's going to look like, what your procurement's going to be, what a reasonable timeline is, and that you have the technical, legal, and financial capability to carry out the project that you've proposed. In fiscal year 23, we saw unprecedented funding, but we also saw unprecedented demand. The FY23 NOFO governed the dispersal of $1.7 billion in federal funding, but the demand applications were received for $8.7 billion in federal funding. So, and that's just the 475 eligible applications. That doesn't count additional applications that were found ineligible. With a delta of 7 billion, obviously there's intense competition. For low-no bus and bus facilities, again, there were 475 applications, of which 342 were highly recommended. Of those, only 130 were funded. So 72% of all eligible applications were evaluated as highly recommended. Of those, they could only fund 130. This makes it really hard for the FTA, because what do you do when everyone submits a winning paper, but you have to pick some winners? You have to start combing through the details and looking for basically mistakes and reasons projects might be excluded from it, because you have to narrow down the applicant pool somehow. So that's just something to be mindful of. in fiscal year 2023, there were 210 Lono applications and 265 bus and bus facility applications. Lono had 2.5 times the amount of funding available at about 1.2 billion, and also received a lesser volume in both absolute number and values of funding requests. So it should come as no surprise that Lono applications were more than twice as likely to get funded, with almost 40% of Lono applications funded as compared to approximately 18% of bus and bus facility. So when you're thinking about your project and where it fits within the criteria of the NOFO, just also make sure you're being strategic. If you have the opportunity to apply for Lono or bus and bus facilities for the same project, look at where you're more likely to get your wins. In FY23, of the 130 projects awarded, they were awarded across 46 states and territories. So that was more than $1.7 billion. But keep in mind, it's a federal program, and there are a number of political considerations. You need the appearance of equity. This requires congressional appropriation. All the projects can't be focused in one geographic area or focused on one demographic group. There needs to be a variety. Almost 40% of the applications that the FTA received in FY 2023 came from the state of California. And that's great in many ways. I mean, we're obviously at the forefront of zero emissions and trying to fight climate change, but it causes difficulty in that the projects have to be dispersed. They can't all be funded in California. We also have to deal with the perception that California is replete with funding. So, part of the reason, a likely reason there were so many applications from California is because there is so much local match funding available to be had. That said, only 10 agencies in California were awarded in FY23, and they received about 12% of the funding. So, I'm not going to say that it's by design, but in effect, California has to meet a higher standard. And that's something we just always need to keep in mind. We've got advantages, but people expect more from us, and we need to work really hard to stand out. The FY24 NOFO was released on Thursday, February 8th for a combined $1.5 billion in funding, approximately $1.1 billion in Lono, and approximately $390 million in bus and bus facilities. This call for projects closes on midnight Eastern Daily EDT, April 25th of 2024. If you are planning to submit a grant application, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and get set up in grants.gov now. You don't want to wait until the last minute. Make sure you have an account, make sure it's in good standing, make sure you have all of the requisite paperwork on file. So new considerations for FY24 include the fact that the FTA, in response to a lot of the difficulties that we've been seeing in the OEM market and the reduction in vendors, have been looking at how to make the American bus market more sustainable for vendors. And to that effect, priority consideration will be given to applicants who are reducing vehicle customization, and that can be through the form of joint procurement, where 3 or more agencies get together and issue a joint procurement with common specifications, or that could be through the use of a standard vehicle model. Of course, there's always participation in statewide contracts. That would be a form of joint procurement. Another thing that will receive priority consideration is earlier payments to vehicle manufacturers, and that can be in the form of advance payments or in the form of progress payments. Let's see, additional considerations to keep in mind for the FY24 NOFO include the fact that zero emission projects do require fleet transition plans. Fleet transition plans have a lot of overlap with ICT plans. So you really should already have the ingredients in hand that you need to make that possible. You will not typically want to just copy over your ICT plan. It is a good idea to read through the requirements of the fleet transition plan and reformat the content so that it is clear to the FDA that you meet the specific criteria and so that they're ordered in an easily legible manner. Workforce development continues to be required for any zero emission project. 5% of your total ask should be assigned to workforce development. Just keep in mind, these amounts are a plus up, not a take down. You really do want to request the workforce development funds because that is in line with some of the administration's priorities, including helping existing staff transition as far as maintenance staff and drivers. The other thing is that the other thing is I'm dropping my earplugs. Anyway. So there's also the partnership provision that remains in place, and that applies to LONO applicants or applicants to both programs. The partnership provision allows you to name partners that can be OEMs, vendors, or project consultants who will work with you on your application once you're awarded. And the great news is CalSTART is ready to assist. With over 30 years of experience, CalSTART can provide a range of technical services to support your project from inception to implementation. We are really looking to partner on projects that are consolidating several transits, focusing on zero emission vehicles, or supporting your at-scale deployment plans. We're able to share our expertise. We can help with a number of different funding, and I won't go through all of it, but I will just say that we've been around for 30 years and we've had a lot of time and experience. We've built physics-based models and tools that have been validated, and we would love to help you get where you need through the use of these tools and through staff expertise. So choosing to apply is not particularly complicated. Deciding whether or not to apply should really be as easy as 1, 2, 3. Is my organization an eligible applicant? Are my projects eligible for this program? And do my projects align with the program purpose, which will be clearly laid out in the NOFO? Some general considerations that you want to keep in mind is that these grants are highly competitive. They were incredibly competitive last year, and I expect they'll be at least as competitive this year. You want to ensure that your application addresses the administration's priorities. You want to emphasize the community benefits that your project's going to yield. You want to emphasize the emission reductions that will be seen from your project. Workforce development is an important component, as is the reduction of customization and collaboration with the workforce, the existing workforce, including training. So back to workforce development, really, as well as support of Justice 40. Tell your story. The FTA receives applications from all 50 states and US territories. Last year, FY23, they received 500 plus in the bus and LONO program alone. Members of the technical review teams come from all over the country, and they may or may not be familiar with your state, county, city, or town. So tell your story. Provide the necessary context and craft a careful and considered narrative. The NOFO is the key and holds the tools you need for success. As it says, the NOFO is the test. Use it as a guide for responding. If it's being asked, it's important. Stand apart. These are competitive programs. Every project has value. What is the value of yours? Think about how you can differentiate your application, be it through supporting evidence, pictures, firsthand accounts. Think, how can I tell a compelling story that stands out and is concise, logically laid out, and relevant? With reviewers reviewing up to 50 applications a time per program, brevity is a virtue. Attention to detail is also critical. Want to avoid some of these common potential pitfalls. Speak to every criteria in the NOFO. Failure to address every criteria is not going to be your friend. So even if a criteria is not applicable to you, just say as much. Avoid budget inconsistencies. Be realistic and don't make impossible promises. The FTA has overseen a bunch of projects over the years, and they have an idea what is a plausible and implausible project timeline. So I know we all want to put our projects in their best light when stepping forward, but at the same time, we need to be realistic and not misrepresent what we can do. The FTA also wants to see proof that you've addressed local planning, either through inclusion in the STIP or the TIP, or the ability to have your project added into the STIP or the TIP, and what NEPA issues there are to be anticipated and where the application is in the environmental process. So those are all elements to consider. Key takeaways. The FTA and transits have a common mission. If you've got a question, they want to help you. So ask and ask early. Understand the statute and follow what's listed in the NOFO. These programs are bound by law and by the guidelines they've set forth. So just read them carefully and pay attention to the detail. Errors and inconsistencies severely hinder applications. It's all about crafting a narrative. Remember to touch upon the following: need, benefits, funding, and implementation. Be comprehensive and effective while also being concise. I know I'm asking for a lot here, and it is a struggle, but all of these things will make your application more competitive. And finally, use resources. There are webinars, the FTA website, industry groups, etc. Here's the contact information for the Region 9 office and the Los Angeles office of the FTA. They were present at CALACT and CTA and have been incredibly helpful. If you have questions, reach out to them. They want to help. Another thing to keep in mind is just remember, from a federal perspective, local match equals local commitment. Between HVIP and other resources, it should be possible to not only provide the required amount of match, but to be able to offer overmatch. If possible, I would recommend doing so. That makes you stand apart in a pool of applicants where everyone's highly recommended, but one person provides the minimum amount of match and another one offers a higher amount. Who's going to look better? Local match is viewed as proof of local commitment. So keep that in mind. Other sources of local match, we're really blessed in California. California is replete with resources. Energize, transit set aside funding lane opens March 27th through September 26th of this year and can be used to help with infrastructure funding. You can learn more about that at energize.org. Additional programs exist, such as LCTOP, which of course stands for the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, obviously. TRCIP, the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. There's the CAR-MOIL programs administered through the air quality districts. And there are additional flexibilities now that are new as of April 2023 to the VW beneficiary mitigation funds. These can now be stacked with HVIP and other carbon state programs as long as they do not claim NOx reductions. I did maybe go a little overboard with the logos, but I just wanted to emphasize that there are so many resources available to us. And California is held to a higher standard, but that's because they know we can meet this higher standard. So let's take advantage of what's available. I just wanted to go over again some of the HVIP transit flexibilities. Hannah worked really hard, to get these available. And I think HVIP is an incredible resource. There's now a 36-month redemption timeline for transit agencies. Instead of a purchase order, you can use a letter of intent, and it can be as simple as the email generated when your HVIP voucher application is approved. HVIP is local match. And sorry, and there's a 15% plus up for public transit service for the purchase of transit buses. So be mindful of that as well. Whether you're looking for a battery electric bus or a fuel cell electric bus, HVIP has different styles and sizes of buses to meet any size of need. With passenger capacities from 20 to over 75, you can find it is likely that you will be able to find what you need among the HVIP approved vehicles. There are incentives ranging from $30K for shuttle buses to $240K for fuel cell electric buses. We have the funding. Come take advantage of it. That is our plea to you. If you need help getting started or you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Hannah about HVIP or myself about Lono and grants. Our contact information is here. I have also included, since I know the slideshow will be available to you, links to a sample letter of intent as well as to Appendix H, which describes the public transit set aside. And I am happy to email you the FY24 NOFO highlights and the CalSTART grant support fact sheet. So we're just another resource. Let us know what we can do to help you.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Katrina. And Michael, do you want to start with the questions or you want me to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start the questions. And folks, before we turn to those questions that have been submitted throughout the webinar, I just want to reflect on Hannah and Katrina's presentations and just acknowledge that what we're working toward together is advantaging California transit agencies as they apply for funds from the federal government. There are a number of ways in which our associations, both CTA and CALACT, have worked to make that more of a reality. Hannah and Katrina touched on some of them, including, for example, the extended application of the sales and use tax exemption for zero emission buses, helping to buy down the cost of that vehicle as you make your transitions. But I also wanted to uplift in this conversation that some of the work that we've done as an association is also provide you all with the ability to exercise a CEQA exemption for the build-out of your charging and refueling infrastructure for zero emission deployments. That's operative to the point that when FTA is looking at your timelines for delivery of projects, you would be able to stipulate to certain environmental streamlining mechanisms that exist here in the state to help bring your projects online sooner. And so as we turn to questions, what I want to acknowledge is that we have a number of questions that touch on largely similar topics. I'm just going to go ahead and then elide some of these questions so we can just address the central aspect of the question all at once. And I think the central question that I've seen on a number of fronts is what happens if an agency has submitted their letter of intent, has secured an HVIP voucher, applies for the Lono grant program, and then subsequently does not win an award. The question that's been asked again several times is what happens to those voucher funds? And so Katrina, Hannah, I'll hand it over to you to respond.
Yeah, I mean, it can go a direction depending on the interest or the groups that are participating. So if funds are not awarded, but you still want to proceed with those HVIP funds, if you have other funds elsewhere to pair with HVIP, great. If you're paying for these buses out of pocket, that's an option for you. You can still proceed with HVIP. If the HVIP voucher request was dependent upon, the Lono award, and it wasn't awarded, then we would just go ahead and cancel. And the route for doing that is simply letting the dealer know that it didn't work out. You're not interested in HVIP at this time, and then the dealer will contact our voucher processing team to get those vouchers canceled. I saw a question in there as well about how long that would take for the funds to get put back into the funding pool. Very little time, unless there's some, it should be rather immediate.
And I think another question was just whether there were negative repercussions for canceling an HVIP voucher.
Not at all. Nope. Nope.
So folks, on this same general topic, one thing that has come up is an observation from at least one of the participants on today's webinar, where they note that given the timeline for submitting a Lono grant application, given the expected timeline for the announcement of the awards, the current 6-month window that is afforded to agencies and drawing down on their HVIP vouchers may be insufficient for them to actually be able to file that letter of intent, file a grant application, receive award, and then issue a purchase order. And so the observation is that perhaps some more time may be necessary. Understand that so much of this is dictated by your funding guidelines and by policies by CARB, but do want to ask for this individual, is there any contemplation of potential extensions to account for what may be that longer lead time from that initial submittal to purchase order execution?
Yeah, this is the first full year of having these flexibilities in HVIP and the transit set aside. So we have yet to see, CARB is always open to seeing if there's, based on the feedback of how the program's going, we look to bettering it, so long as it still stands with the principles of the program. Therefore, if an extended period of time from LOI submission to purchase order upload or expiration of that letter of intent, if that's going to help, and it's just a matter of a couple additional months, it's something that certainly can be discussed with CARB if the need is there.
All right, and thank you, Hannah. And on that front, folks, I'll just elevate from our associations and have heard the observation that may be something we pursue directly with CARB, recognizing that the interest is making sure that you all have success as you apply for Lono. If there is an administrative complication there, we may be able to address that as the year goes on. And so there are a number of other questions here that I would like to touch on in the remaining 5 minutes of time. Katrina, we have one question here that I think you may be beginning to answer with your response, but what is the significance of the partnership provision that was referenced on the fiscal year 24 NOFO slide, may be of advantage for all parties to receive your wisdom?
The named partner provision allows applicants to specify partners they intend to work with on the project and include funding for the partnership in their request. Partners can include OEMs, vendors, or project consultants, and CalSTART is an eligible project consultant. So if you know that you're going to be working with a project consultant, the costs for that activity can be wrapped up into the application that you submit. Just like if you know what buses you're going to purchase through which vendor, those costs can be wrapped into the project application. And again, the partnership provision applies to LONO applications or to projects that apply for both tranches of funding.
Thank you, Katrina, for that answer. And we'll just remark, we've got a few other questions, some of which we may be able to get through in rapid fire succession. The first is what happens after the transit set aside of $84 million runs out? And you probably have some observations. I'm happy to jump in as well with some observations after you respond.
Yeah, so if the $84 million go relatively quickly, we have the flexibility built into the IM, which states that, standard HVIP would continue to fund not just transit, but it's been set up so that standard HVIP can fund set-asides as funds run out, if that is the case.
So folks, again, if you're not able to get the transit set aside, you're able to pull from that larger HVIP standard. But what I will observe is that at this stage with HVIP, the funding allocations, at least for the transit set aside, will be subject to an annual appropriation unless we see the legislature come through with multi-year funding. One of the chief priorities that we have as an industry is to, get that funding level reinstated with multi-year commitments and at a higher level. And so for the questioner who presented that question to us, that is the answer to what we may see with regards to the $84 million. But then also we need to look ahead and the various things that we can do to try to address that very limited capacity. And so I do want to just turn to remaining few questions here. There is an individual who asked the question about having already issued a purchase order before March of 2023. Is there a way to apply and receive a voucher given the time that has lapsed from that purchase order to when they would be looking to take receipt of funds?
I would say reach out to us directly. That can either be the info@californiahvip.org. Here, I'll just post it in the chat here to answer the question, which email to reach out to. I would have to assume that a new PO would need to be, a updated PO would need to be issued anyways to account for any incentive amount adjustments, which needs to be calculated on the purchase order. So, let me show you where you can send that email.
All right. And folks, as we are coming up on the balance of our time, I do want to reflect, we didn't get through all of the questions here today. If you had a question that we did not get to, please do feel free to reach out to myself or Jackie Cuddy. We will get those questions to Hannah and Katrina, get you a response to those questions in short order. We'll also reflect, as Jackie had at the start of the webinar, that the presentation will be available on both of our websites. We'll also put out information through my executive director's report. Would trust that Jackie would be able to put out notice through her standing newsletter. Make sure that you all get the information that you need in applying for these dollars. As we close, of course, wanted to just thank Hannah and Katrina and the whole team at CalSTART for providing such great support to the industry and to our associations in navigating what is without a doubt a difficult landscape in terms of funding and ZE transition. And so just again, want to thank you for being here and for joining today's webinar. And so with that, we will conclude today's webinar. Thank you.